inside the 10. Oklahoma had so much trouble last week. Throwing on first down this time. Caught for a touchdown. Number 3 of the day for Ryan Broyles. The 5th touchdown pass by Landry Jones today.
Yes, indeed. Home sweet home for Oklahoma. Chalk up 36 consecutive home victories, the nation's longest active winning streak in all of Division I football, as the OU Sooners whip up on Texas Tech 45-7 in the home finale for the 2010 Oklahoma Sooner season. OU moves to 8-2 overall and still in contention to win the Big 12 South Championship. They and A&M tied for second in the South, trailing Oklahoma State by a game with 2 games to go. For Texas Tech, their Big 12 season already over as they finish out Big 12 play with a record of 3-5 in conference and 5-5 overall. We'll talk a little bit more about the Texas Tech future in just a second. For the OU Sooners, what they're looking for today was obviously getting that good feeling back and being able to do the little things right offensively and defensively, and they did exactly that. Offensively, it was a clinic in the first half, scoring on their opening possession, and even though Tech scored on their opening possession to make it 7-7, the Sooners still kept the mission going to run the ball effectively. For the Sooners, they knew in order to throw effectively, the passing game would not be as good if the running game did not do their part. Well, give credit to the OU offensive line and give credit to DeMarco Murray, Roy Finch, as well as Moses Madu. They counted for a little more than 200 rushing yards for the Sooners. And naturally, when you can run the ball that well, it makes life easier for your passing game. And Landry Jones had wide open receivers all afternoon against the 3rd worst pass defense in all of college football in Texas Tech. The Red Raiders couldn't cover receivers if their life depended upon it. And we saw Landry Jones with a huge day, over 300 yards throwing, 5 TD passes, including 3 to Ryan Broyles. And we showed that clip at the beginning because now Ryan Broyles has more receptions as well as more TD receptions than any receiver in the history of OU football, surpassing the great Mark Clayton from those early 2000 teams. And keep in mind that Broyles did it in 3 years, and of course Mark Clayton, as great as he was, it took him 4 years to amass those statistics. So Broyles, an even further testament to how talented he is, one of the best receivers in all the country, probably the best receiver in the Big 12 behind Justin Blackman of Oklahoma State. But again, Landry Jones was spectacular today. We'll talk about him. We're going to talk about him more in just a couple of minutes when we break down the 4 keys to the game. But the running game for the Sooners had to be on all cylinders. It was. The holes were there. And then we saw with Oklahoma driving in the first half, holding a slim lead. And then you see Roy Finch, that explosiveness that we've been bragging about, a 29-yard touchdown run, and Oklahoma would continue their flurry of points. The defense for the Sooners, other than that first drive, played about as perfect of a game as you could ask. And Taylor Potts, whom last season carved up the OU secondary, today a complete reversal. It was a lot different. Had under 200 yards passing, no TD passes. In fact, threw a first-half interception to Travis Lewis. He was frustrated all day. The Oklahoma secondary, give them a lot of credit. They did their homework against Taylor Potts. And we'll talk a little bit more in a second about Texas Tech's receivers in our 4 points as well. For the Sooners, yes, last year going to Lubbock was no fun. Wouldn't be fun at all if you lost by 4 touchdowns, which the Sooners did last season, 41-13. So this season, they made amends and not only get the win against Texas Tech, but also make amends for that performance last week against A&M, in which they blew opportunities against an A&M team that's playing a lot better now than they were just a few weeks ago. We saw that on a Saturday night with A&M's victory at Baylor, a team that Oklahoma will have to see next week. We're going to go ahead and highlight the 4 keys to the game that we had talked about on the matchup show previously. Key number 1, patch-up Batch. We're talking about Texas Tech running back Baron Batch, who last season destroyed Oklahoma with his running and also hurt the Sooners by being utilized as a receiver and having a lot of success. I'm going to go B- in this case. B- because On one hand, Batch did statistically do well. He had almost 100 yards rushing, had about 91 yards rushing. However, Oklahoma's defense, by and large, I thought did a good job on him, limiting the big play. No touchdowns for Batch on this day. And unlike last year, where Batch was able to really hurt the Sooners as a receiver, today, not the case at all. So B- for the Oklahoma defense against Batch. Number 2, Yak, yards after catch. Another area where Texas Tech excels in. Even though Mike Leach isn't there anymore, you still have experience with the receivers to where when they catch those passes, they're able to really, really hurt you after the catch. Well, today I'm going to go an A- for the secondary because the Texas Tech receivers were very limited today. As a matter of fact, if you looked at Taylor Potts' stats, he averaged just a little over 4 yards per reception. That right there is Oklahoma's defense doing the job against the Red Raider receivers. Of course, La Leong, who's having a terrific year for Texas Tech. Even though he actually threw a touchdown pass out of the Wildcat formation for Tech's only score, he was contained today, as was Torres and company for the Red Raiders. So the Sooner defense, yards after catch, an area where the Red Raiders have excelled in, today very limited in. Key number 3, Landry Jones. Let it fly, exploit that Red Raider defense. A+ for Landry Jones. We mentioned it earlier, 5 touchdown passes. Also, he didn't throw for interceptions. And what I really loved on this afternoon for Landry, not only the fact that he was so comfortable in the pocket, but also when he got out of the pocket, throwing on the run, a couple of times throwing across his body and still being able to complete the throws. Landry Jones was spectacular on this day. His completion percentage for the year, by the way, is near 70% as opposed to last year, which was under 60. So statistically, keeps getting better and better, especially at home. And finally, key number 4 for Oklahoma's 45-7 victory over Texas Tech. Do the little things right. I'm going to go A for Oklahoma. Little things like last week, for example, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1. The Sooners stunk up the joint. They couldn't convert on those short yard situations. Today they did. For example, opening drive, OU had a 3rd and 1. Murray with the first down would later score a touchdown with the Sooners. And on a 4th and 1 with Oklahoma driving later in the half, it was another Oklahoma running back, this time Moses Madu, off a terrific lead block out of the eye by Trey Millard. Picked up a first down, and then later that would set up Finch's 29-yard touchdown run. On the other hand, Texas Tech had a couple of short yard situations on a 4th and 1, couldn't convert in the first quarter, and then second quarter on a 4th and 1. Again, the Sooner defense steps up. So the little things lead to big things, and Oklahoma did the little things right on both sides of the ball. And when you do the little things right, it leads to big things. It usually will lead to a big win. Case in point today. For the Texas Tech Red Raiders, they dropped to 5-5. Again, the Big 12 season's over for them. That's the bad news. The good news is that they still have a shot at a bowl game. They close out with Weber State and Houston, both games at home. All they need is one win out of their next 2 to get to bowl eligibility. And once again, they still have a shot at a winning season if they can knock both opponents off. They'll be favored to do just that. For Texas Tech, unfortunately, they're going to be saying goodbye to some seniors, including both quarterbacks in Potts as well as Sheffield. Baron Batch is a senior, as well as their very talented defensive lineman, Colby Whitlock. They lose him as well. La Leong is gone after this year, too. So as rough as it was for Tech this year in certain games, especially today, it could be rougher next year because they're going to have to start from scratch in several key positions. For the Sooners, they still have that mission of trying to win the South. They know that the destiny's in their own hands if they can take care of Baylor next week, and if they can take care of Oklahoma State in Bedlam, a game that they'll probably be an underdog in 2 days after Thanksgiving in Stillwater. So for the Sooners, unfortunately, those last 2 games are on the road, and we know Oklahoma struggles away from home. Hopefully, they can get that taken care of. We've said that for I don't know how long. But maybe it's just a matter of time before the Sooners are able to put together a complete game against a pretty good opponent on the road. They're going to be facing 2 good opponents in Baylor and Oklahoma State these next 2 weeks. It will be the Sooners and the Bears from Waco on November 20th. And other games from the Big 12 that we need to talk about before we close this segment out. First of all, talking about Colorado, and of course they fired Dan Hawkins a few days ago. What happens? They beat Iowa State. They actually dominate the Cyclones in Boulder. Iowa State, that's a costly loss because they dropped to 5-6. They only have one more chance to get to that magical 6th-win of bowl eligibility. Good news is for them, they're at home. Bad news, they have to play Missouri next week. Missouri puts a beat down on Kansas State. The final was 38-28. The game really wasn't that close because K-State got some garbage points at the end. Missouri with the dominant second half. They bounced back after that loss to Tech a week ago. Kansas State can't follow up the win against Texas as K-State loses in Columbia. So Missouri, a solid second place in the Big 12 North. Best team right now in the North, of course, is Nebraska. Defensively, they hold Kansas to under 100 yards. They win 20-3. Offensively, it wasn't a great performance at all for the Huskers. A pretty conservative game plan they called on this day. Nebraska just needs to win one of their next two in order to wrap up the North and go to the Big 12 Championship. Basically, you could already pack your bags, Husker fans, and head to Arlington because that's where your team's going. And some other matchups. We mentioned A&M and Baylor in a high-scoring fest. A&M, boy, they continue red hot. They remain tied in the Big 12 South, trailing Oklahoma State by a game as A&M wins at Baylor. The Bears now have lost back-to-back games. They're still bowl eligible as they are at 7-4 overall. And Oklahoma State, you really have to tip your cap to them. Best season that they've had since 1984 as they go to Texas and take care of the Longhorns as OSU wins 33-16, remaining in first in the Big 12 South. And for Texas, no need to really, beat them up. Every team goes through bad years. This just happens to be Texas's bad year. They're not going to be down for very long. But the Longhorns do need to win their last two games because now they're at 4-6. They lose again. They are out of bowl contention. That's very hard to believe, by the way. So that is a wrap-up for the Big 12 Conference. And final score, once again, from Norman, 45-7. The Sooners moved to 8-2 overall, and they moved to 4-2 in Big 12 play. 45-7 over the Red Raiders. Boomer Sooner.